Good morning. Welcome to C-Suite Conversations. I'm Nancy Begranoff, the Dean of the Robbins School, and we're here this morning to hear Senior Associate Dean Richard Coughlan interview Stanton McComb. Stanton is the president of Medical Surgical McKesson, which is the fastest growing and most profitable unit within McKesson. So we're delighted to have him here this morning. We hope that you enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Good morning to all of you. Really appreciate you coming out this morning. Stanton, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
I thought to start, we might have you describe the scope and size of this business unit that you oversee. Now, with the recent acquisition, which we'll discuss later, this unit may generate as many as $6 billion. If it were a standalone business, it would actually be a Fortune 500 company, maybe. Tell us about the size and the scope of all that McKesson Medical Surgical does.
Okay, so McKesson Medical Surgical is one of the largest and leading distributors of medical supplies. So there's Band-Aids, syringes, gauze, table paper, all the things that you would see in a physician office or in a long-term care setting. We distribute all of that to physician offices, skilled nursing facilities, home care agencies, durable medical equipment, retailers, basically any healthcare setting outside of the hospital. So we don't do what we call acute care distribution. We do ambulatory or alternate site distribution. Retail clinics, urgent care centers, pretty much any setting you can imagine. And we also distribute RX drugs and vaccines. We also distribute equipment and lab testing supplies. So our business is really based at the core around wholesale distribution. We also we service all 50 states and have 50 core distribution centers across the country. We have about 1,400 sales reps out there in the country who have relationships with providers and help those providers pick the supplies that they want to then use with their patients or in their practices. We distribute using either UPS or our own private trucks. We will drop ship supplies directly to patients in some cases where our providers don't want to hold inventory themselves, and there's more and more just-in-time and more velocity through the supply chain. So actually this past year we'll do about 8.5 million packages straight to patients, and carries a little bit different dynamic than what people mostly think of traditional wholesale distribution. We'll generate about $6 billion in supplies, or $6 billion in revenue, and we're in the midst of integrating one of our largest competitors that we bought about a year ago.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. So earlier this year, McKesson acquired PSS World Medical. Before we get to the nuts and bolts of that integration, that acquisition, let's rewind 15 years in your own career. Stanton, you were at Citicorp actually around the time that Citi and Travelers came together. Isn't that the case?
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about what you were doing at Citi and what you were seeing as this integration, massive integration, was taking place.
So I'll back up even maybe a summer before that because it may be relevant to some of the students in the audience. This is where am I? I'm going to try to date myself here. 1998, and I was in between my first and second year in business school. And at that time, if you recall, this was a dot-com boom, and dot-coms and B2C was big. It was huge. And as I got to Northwestern, where I went to business school, everybody was really talking about the place to be was venture capital. That's where all the money was to be made, and I was very much capitalist and very interested in making money. And so I networked like crazy to get an internship at a venture capital job, and I got an internship, luckily, through Travelers Insurance. And Travelers has all this capital and all this cash that they need to put to play, and they put it into alternate risk vehicles, and led a little venture capital business that was run by this guy, Jack Rivkin. And the only reason I really got that internship, besides networking, I got the interview, but I was the only one who had any healthcare background at all, and any interest in healthcare. Everybody else was interested in B2C, e-commerce, or telephonics, or optics at the time.
Sure.
And so I got this venture capital internship. I did well, got to know Jack and the team, and then that fall, Travelers sort of merged with Citibank. But really what I would say is it was Travelers acquired Citibank in one of the most amazing reverse mergers or reverse acquisitions of all time. And what's interesting now, and I'll come back when we talk about the PSS acquisition, is at the time what was apparent to me, and again, I wasn't in the know on all of these things, but at least from my perception, all of the leaders at Travelers got all of the senior jobs. So Sandy Weil, who owned Travelers and Solomon Smith Barney at the time, and who basically orchestrated this Citigroup merger, took all of his lieutenants and his deputies and put them into leaderships, including the venture capital guy. Jack Rivkin got to run the alternative investments in venture capital. So Jack called me that fall and said, why don't you come back and run this larger healthcare portfolio that we now have and combined. And I went back after graduation and did that. And for several years, I helped Jack and Citigroup make investments, really secondary investments into small startup companies. And what I discovered there, and what you and I have talked about, and I think would also be interesting to a lot of people around this table, is I added zero value during that time.
You added zero value.
Zero value. So I was the young MBA guy sitting around a boardroom as an observer or a director to these startup companies with other later stage career experts who had run companies, built companies, and I'm sitting around these boards as an advisor and trying to help these companies grow, and really I couldn't really add much value. And it was apparent to me,
Wow.
it was interesting, and it was a good learning opportunities for me, but I really wasn't doing anything. I was just there as a representative of Citigroup, which was a big checkbook. And I think at that point I realized, venture capital is cool,
yeah.
and it's very exciting and sexy, and you can make a lot of money at it if you're lucky. But you got to kind of know your place. And for me at that time, it wasn't the right place for me. Now someday I would love to go back to it, but
yeah.
it wasn't the right time. So an opportunity came up for me to run one of our portfolio companies, which I
Right,
did.
so you're sniffing around at some of these companies, and there are pieces of these companies that look intriguing to you at that time. Even if you're not adding value to the conversation, as you
Right.
get into the guts of the company, there's something that's intriguing to you?
I would say I haven't met a company yet that's not kind of interesting in some form or another, either because it's failing or succeeding.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot of, I think the interesting thing for me was being a part of the company. And I'm sure you'll hear a lot of consultants say that one thing that they miss is the ability to actually execute their ideas.
Yes.
I felt very similar to that as in that role that I was in at Citigroup, is I would like to be more part of the operation and actually running through with the ideas that we're coming up with.
When you jump from Citi, then it's for a company that you had invested in, or it was actually?
Yeah, so Jack and I had put a lot of money into a company called MedLogic, which developed basically a super glue for closing cuts. If you're familiar with Dermabond, it's a J&J product, was at the time the leading product, and so it was MedLogic and Stanton McComb up against J&J, and I can just ask how you think that competition ended. It did not end well, and it wasn't ending well. So the CEO of the company quit very unexpectedly, and Jack asked me to step in and kind of run the business on an interim basis and eventually help Citigroup sell out its position, which we did.
This was in 2000, I think,
Yeah,
when you
right.
became the interim CEO.
Right.
And did you have to relocate for that position, Stanton, from where you were in New York?
Well, I was in New York City. I was about ready to get married, and I had to basically bounce back and forth between New York and Colorado Springs. And then we eventually closed the Colorado Springs operation and moved all the operations to England, where we could sell the product.
Yeah. And you lived in England for a time?
Yep. So about 6 months in between New York and Colorado Springs. Then Molly and I, after we got married, we up and moved to Plymouth, England.
Yep.
Where the ship sailed from.
And where? And what brought you back to the States?
So we sold the company, and we came back, and this is post 9/11. So we were in New York 9/11. We were interested in kind of raising a family, and just New York wasn't the right place. I sort of felt like I now knew I didn't want to be doing venture capital in the way that I was doing it, and really enjoyed my time running MedLogic, and wanted to get back into sort of leadership positions. And so my wife and I just sort of up and left New York, and I quit Citigroup, and we moved to San Francisco. My wife found a job at Levi Strauss, which she loved. I spent the summer golfing, which was wonderful. And then I landed at McKesson.
McKesson's based in San Francisco, actually.
Right, yeah.
It strikes me, so McKesson is today 14th on the Fortune 500 list, may enter the top 10, I guess, next year with not only the acquisition we'll discuss, but a more recent acquisition than that. It strikes me that McKesson is one of the most under-the-radar companies among that top 20 list. Does it strike you that way as well?
Yeah, and that's been largely intentional.
So talk about that if you would.
So McKesson is very committed to being a business partner to our customers and we do not, we shy away from channel conflict, we shy away from competing with our customers, and we try to make them as successful as possible, and we call that our Better Health mission. And we look to make their business healthier so that they can stay effective in treating their patients and taking care of their patients. We try to connect our customers across segments, so connecting physicians with home care agencies and so forth. But we don't have a big consumer business. The work we do with consumers is vis-a-vis our providers. Mm-hmm. And so we haven't really traditionally needed to develop a consumer awareness. That is changing a little bit. And I foresee that will continue to change, and we'll start to have a more and more prominent role. The one soft spot on that, and one of the reasons that I'm happy to be here today, and hopefully you'll hear more about McKesson even in the Richmond community, is that when it comes to attracting talent, if you've never heard of McKesson, that becomes a challenge. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many interviews I've had where people have just started researching McKesson or just heard of it, and I'll often get from people, I had no idea you guys were here, I have no idea, and I get that in every role I've had at McKesson. Sure. So it's something that impedes our ability to really attract, I think, great talent, and that's important to us.
Your first role was in, I think, strategy, corporate development for McKesson. What were you doing at that time? You were based in San Francisco?
Yep, yeah. Yep. So I went to work in our strategy and business development group, and it's a small group out of San Francisco, and effectively we would go around to the different business units and consult to the leadership teams there to help them grow, or help them deal with various issues. And one of the things I've always enjoyed is technology, and McKesson has a broad technology portfolio, both of internal tools and systems, but of products that we resell into the marketplace. And the opportunity has been there for the last decade for us to be highly differentiated in the way that if you are a customer of ours and you use our technology and you use our distribution service, the two of those things work very well together. It's not rocket science, it's not a very complex strategy, but if we can pull it off, it's highly differentiated. And so we'll often hear people say, well, I can get a better price from one of your competitors, but I can't afford to not have the technologies you bring into my practice and the efficiencies that those technologies afford me. And so stitching those services and products together is something that I've been working on for a decade now, and I did a lot of consulting around when I first joined McKesson.
This data sharing between your firm and your customers is probably more important today than ever, not only for the competitive advantage it provides you, but in terms of some of the efficiencies of your customers. How rapidly has that changed for you in terms of the importance of data sharing?
Well, frankly, it's been there for a while now. It's just that it's becoming more broadly spoken of, and it's becoming more patient-oriented on patient data. I would kind of follow the money back. Over a decade ago, even we've been tracking inventory values and inventory data very closely for a while, and especially in retail pharmacy. And understanding, we have systems today that understand and predict when somebody's going to be out of a particular drug on their shelf. And we will auto-fulfill on that well in advance of them ever even having to enter a keystroke or an order. And that's not new technology. And it's interesting that we're really just getting there now on the patient side. Yeah. So the importance of data is huge. The importance of privacy and security are more and more important. But these are things that McKesson's been doing and doing well for a while, which I think is advantageous for us.
We're just starting to require our undergraduates, MBA students, to take analytics here. That importance of not only having the data, but understanding how to take things out of the data and make decisions is something that you say McKesson has done well for a time now.
Yep, critical, and there's a couple guys in the audience here who can speak to that actually from McKesson. And I would highly recommend that you pay deep attention to statistics and make sure you take your statistics courses and operations too. Yeah. There's some things that I wish I could go back. If I were to go back to school, ops, OB, and statistics would all be things that I would also put a plug in for accounting and finance, sure. Just because your boss,
our dean's an accountant,
who's now left. She asked me to put a plug in for accounting. I'd start with ops and OB and statistics, but you really do need to understand data, and you need to parse it upon. But the other thing is, data analytics. We talk about this a little bit. McKesson is like a shiny object in the river. It's only as good as people can act on it, and it's only as good as people can actually change behavior on that. And I will even go further, saying it's only as good as people can consistently change behavior. So creating habits. and instilling things that are lasting and enduring. And we do things, we've been doing some things at McKesson where we use analytics to help us negotiate with suppliers that we're buying product from and then distributing. Those negotiations are point in time, and then we need to figure out how do we contract and establish that based on the data, and how do we continually improve our position with our suppliers and our suppliers' position with us in the marketplace based on the data that we consistently see.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there.
After a couple of years in the corporate strategy group, then you move into an operating role finally with McKesson. Is that the case?
All right. So my couple of leaders at McKesson came to me, and there was a leadership role open at this sleepy little pharmacy software company. We had a business called McKesson Pharmacy Systems, and they make the software that goes into retail pharmacies. And this little business was based out of Detroit, and it was probably a fifth or sixth place player in the market. And we have a saying in McKesson: if you're not number one or two, close first, we're getting out of that business. And so the opportunity was to go lead this company, and they said, well, do you want to move to Detroit? And nobody wanted to move to Detroit. And coincidentally, my wife was from the Detroit area. We'd been married there. Our family was there. Of all the places we could move, we had a newborn at this time. That was like the best place for us. I said, yeah, I can rough it out and go to Detroit. It'll be fine. And if you don't know Detroit, the greater Detroit area is actually beautiful, and Michigan's a great state. And so we moved there, and it was simply just an underfunded, underled, neglected little business unit with a great potential. And the whole focus that I brought to it was simply pick up your chins and start competing, and B, let's try to figure out how to stitch together the software in these pharmacies with a distribution service so we can throw more value to the broader McKesson Corporation. And that's what we did, and we went from fifth to first place in about 4.5 years. And the big part of that was an acquisition of our competitor. We were primarily focused in one segment, which is mom and pop pharmacies, which is, there are a lot of them still, but they're not growing. They're competing against the Rite Aids and the CVS's of the world and the other chains. And our product really was a tired product, and so we needed to move into the chain segment. We couldn't do that, so we acquired, at that time, our largest competitor, and that took us from third on up to first place.
What was the size of that business unit, do you remember?
Yeah, it's pretty small, as McKesson goes. So I think we were, even after the acquisition, we were only doing about $150 million in revenue and not making money. But we were throwing significant value to the broader pharmaceutical distribution business.
And that's an important part of this umbrella that is McKesson. I'd like you to talk either about that time or about today in terms of what it means to be a part of a company that's one of the 15 biggest in the States in terms of the synergies you can find between the business units.
Yeah, and I should remind me to ask or talk about the value of working in a small business unit too, because I think so. McKesson's made up of 12 business units today, and the pharmaceutical distribution business is by far the largest. It'll generate, well over $110 billion in sales, and that's the flagship business unit. And it's been around. We've been doing that for 180 years. We're I think the 6th oldest publicly traded company in the country, and very successful. We've serviced customers there for 4 generations. So I've been to places where literally they will say, "My great grandpappy was to work with McKesson and." And they gave us a discount, so why can't you give us a discount? So we've been around for a long time, and we've really focused on our customers. But so the pharmaceutical distribution business is the big flagship business unit. But then there's 11 other business units, of which McKesson Medical Surgical is one, McKesson Pharmacy Systems is another, and then there's a whole host. And we really divide the business up in 2 divisions: distribution solutions, which is distribution businesses, and technology businesses. And I think the challenge that we have, and I want to mention, is it's difficult to move talent around these business units. These business units are run very largely discreetly. So McKesson Medical Surgical has its own P&L. We will work and collaborate with other business units in McKesson, especially as it relates to integrating our products and services. But that's a challenge for us because of the way we're organized. We're kind of confederated, if you will.
How often do the business units leaders gather, the dozen of you?
Maybe 3 times a year, 3 or 4 times a year, and we'll talk about broader strategies and opportunities to overweight or to explore new areas or to integrate. But more often than not, different business units, like there's another McKesson business unit that's actually headquartered here in Richmond, McKesson Business Performance Services, and they provide billing services for the physicians around the country. Now, as it turns out, their business and our business, we share a lot of customers. There's a lot of chances to cross-sell and to integrate those value propositions. And we're doing more with them just because the market sort of takes us there.
Yeah.
And that's probably more often than not what drives collaboration across McKesson, is that our customers of the market create an opportunity, and we collectively go after it.
So 2.5 years ago, you were asked to lead Med-Surg. What did you see upon arrival at Med-Surg, and what were the initial challenges of that business unit?
Well, McKesson Medical Surgical is a very good business unit. It's got a lot of tenure and talent in it, and that talent existed before I got here. About 6 years ago, McKesson Medical Surgical was struggling, and my predecessor and the executives at McKesson made the decision to really focus on the ambulatory markets. And when they made that decision, that meant that we divested our acute care distribution business to Owens & Minor, which is another local company. And since that time, since we actually let go of something, this business has been growing wonderfully. Now, the team is very tenured, very seasoned. Our capabilities are great. We're in a good market. And so it's been very favorable, and that's what I discovered when I got here.
Yeah. Nonetheless, you're obviously always looking for acquisition targets, and one pops up with PSS World Medical down in Jacksonville. They're competitors of yours at the time that you arrived. Can you say anything about how early you began to look at them as a potential target?
Yeah. So we in all of our businesses and in our corporation, every business unit has a strategy practice that we do every year. And in the spring, we'll sit down and develop a strategy for every business unit. And M&A is always a part of that for every business unit in McKesson. So every business unit has an M&A funnel, a target list. Most of the larger business units have built-in business development groups and M&A groups in them. I have one, somebody reports directly to me, and they are constantly developing relationships and developing that funnel and really just cold calling companies and saying, would you ever be interested in selling your company to us? And we make a lot of calls, and we'll probably look at 100 deals every year and maybe do 1 or 2 or 3. PSS is a little bit different. It's obviously a much larger company. It was our leading competitor in the physician office space in particular. We were beating them, frankly, in the extended care space or long-term care and home care space. And for 17 years, we basically had PSS on our M&A funnel.
Wow.
And we had made 2 prior runs at acquiring them, and for whatever reason, they weren't at the time interested in selling, or we weren't interested in buying when they wanted to sell. And it finally came to fruition last year when they announced that they wanted to sell their extended care business unit. And we very quickly knew that we would like to acquire that, and while we're at it, why don't we just acquire the whole of the corporation? And it was the right time for them, and it was the right time for us, so it came together. It was fortuitous.
From McKesson's side, who's involved in that deal?
Well, so one of the things I think we do pretty well at McKesson from an M&A perspective is everyone's involved. So what we do is we have a point person who runs the due diligence, but they don't really own the due diligence. The different functional leaders and the business unit leaders that would then eventually adopt that business have to own the numbers, own their research, own the risks, and develop the plan on how we're going to get a synergy out of an acquisition. And our BD group just simply coordinates all of that work and makes sure that we kind of follow a process. And so virtually, you probably, on the PSS deal, it's a little different because it's a public company, so we kept the working team smaller, but you might have 20 or 30 people working in due diligence, and you work it pretty quickly, and then post-announcement, that number might double as we start to refine our plans. And we believe in involving integration. This is something you'll hear from a lot of consultants, and hopefully you guys talk about this in business school, but making sure you're developing a business plan and an integration plan while you're doing the due diligence. And you make some tough decisions and make some clear assumptions and document them during integration and due diligence, so that when you actually take ownership of whatever you bought, you know how to run this house. And it is like buying a house in a lot of ways. You've got to really understand, okay, you've got bad plumbing. You see it, you got some stuff you need to change in the house. The day you take ownership, you know exactly who's going to own fixing that plumbing and changing it out. And You just got to have that plan. You got to make that sure it's clear. So we have a lot of people involved in that from the very beginning.
This is a sizable house that's being built now between the two firms, though. 9,000 employees. We talked about the revenue figures. The question I want to ask you is this. You talked about the fact that you really like to understand a business and get into the business. Mm-hmm. But when a firm is this size, Stanton, you can't really serve as a sort of general manager of the business unit. I mean, this is a massive business now. How do you manage that tension between wanting to know what's going on in the business and also having to serve, connect with the other business leaders within McKesson?
Right. So that is one of the challenges for me personally, and I think that's challenges for probably a lot of the people who report directly to me. Is personally, I like to be down in the weeds and the details. And it might come from the fact that I started in research, and in venture capital, you want to kind of always understand the mechanics of something. Or just it's the nature of being a young manager. You just want to micromanage and control things. And it's just kind of where you may start. And then as your career grows and as I've taken on more and more responsibility, you find that as businesses scale up, you just can't be that way anymore. But everything inside of you wants to do that. And now that our business has effectively doubled, it's just a bigger ship, and it requires more time to turn and more a different form of leadership as opposed to general management, and that's a tough transition to make. So we've asked, we're trying to empower more of our employees. I'm trying to empower more of my people, which really is code for letting go. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, and it is challenging, but you have to do it, otherwise it's not sustainable, and it's a work in progress.
Talk about the talent that you acquired, though, at PSS World Medical. You're starting now to go through the process that Citi and Travelers had to sort through in terms of what the talent looks like. How's it going?
It's going well. So one of the interesting things is the former CEO of PSS World Medical is now our COO, who reports to me, and as he likes to say, it was just one change in the vowel of his title. It was an important vowel. And he and we agreed that it would be really important for him to stay with the business. I wanted to stay. The guy's been in the industry 20 years compared to my 2. And so he's got a lot more experience than me. He knows all of his people. This is still a very relationship-oriented business, believe it or not, at the end of the day. And so all of his reps are very important to us, and all of our reps are important. So as we bring these two selling teams together, which were just up until a year ago, fierce competitors, trying to keep everybody together, keep them focused on growth. And we believed it was important for Gary Corliss, who is the former CEO, to stay on, and that's been so far so good. He and I learned how to work together, and we've talked a lot about the cultural differences, and we've been able to retain a number of his direct reports and put them into key positions, and our team is definitely better because of it. But we are storming. Have you ever heard of forming, storming, norming, these concepts of how teams come together, and that's why I mentioned things like OB being very important. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, people run the business, and the teams run the business, and how those teams interact are critical, and are they healthy? And so I think we've got a lot of potential, and given the talent we have on the team, we just got to kind of come together and learn how to work together.
You have a timeline in your head about when the storming needs to end?
I don't know I wish I knew the answer to that. I wish I had a forecast on that. So the senior leadership team and I have been working together very closely for over a year now. Yeah. And a lot of the other teams have just kind of come together in the last 6 months, and they're just starting to storm. And one of the things we're spending a lot of time talking about is culture. What is the culture that we had, or had the different cultures we had, and what do we want going forward? And so we've had the benefit of time together to talk candidly about how did it work before, how did it work in either company, and I guess I give us credit for the fact that we've committed and invested time to having some very candid discussions. I think it's hard now for us to help some of the other teams have similar discussions, so we've got to make sure we create those venues for that.
Their culture was a lot more entrepreneurial. Is that the case? Yeah. Felt more like a small business, even though it was massive?
Yeah, they've been around for about 20 years. They were a startup company, and they were more entrepreneurial, more nimble, faster moving, more comfortable with the risk. Frankly, they didn't have $120 billion of brand value at stake. Sure. And so the dynamics are different. And we are more disciplined, probably more conservative, methodical company. And so those two cultures are different. Now, I think at the core, we have a lot of common values. We're interested in our customers, high integrity. There's a degree of respect that we have. We don't have mean-spirited cultures at all. They're very friendly, collaborative cultures. So some core things are there that are common. But there's enough about the way we did business that's different that creates some rubs.
Yeah.
And we're just kind of working through those things.
I want to talk again about the path that you've traveled to get to this position. It happened fairly rapidly for you to arrive at the president of a sizable business unit. And you also mentioned that you said yes to a bunch of opportunities that others, for a variety of reasons, might have said no to. Maybe what advice do you have for the students about the steps you've taken in your career to arrive at the position you're at today?
Yeah, I would probably give you a couple of pieces of advice, which is one, keep your head up and watch for opportunities. And two, when something comes up, raise your hand. Don't expect people to instantly know you're interested in it or think of you for that role. So raise your hand for it. And then three, be ready to relocate. And I know that sounds kind of superficial or just sort of basic, but you'd be surprised at how many jobs we offer to people that they turn away from because they're not willing to relocate. And I tell people all the time, it's a long career, and there's always chances to move back to places. And I've relocated a lot in my career, and it has been an advantage. I would just tell you, it's been an advantage where other people, frankly, might have been even more qualified than me. They just would not move, and understandably, for a lot of family reasons or other preferences. But if you can entertain relocation, it is a huge advantage, and you'd be surprised at how many people don't do it today. So those are big things. One other thing we talked about that it's worth mentioning is a lot of people, and even at McKesson, we get hung up around you're part of a $6 billion organization, and I can't imagine going to work for a business unit that makes $150 million in revenue. It would look bad on my resume if I were to go down. And I struggle with that quite a bit because I can tell you that I think the smaller the business unit, the more complex things tend to be, and the more, frankly, they can be pretty challenging. All of a sudden you start worrying about cash flow,
Sure.
You start worrying about how you're going to pay for your employees. It's different. And as somebody who interviews a lot of candidates, if you've come from a big Fortune 500 company and you've been in a very traditional role and get a fancy title that says VP, that's good, but I'm going to ask you a lot more interested, what did you actually do there that was different, that it was challenging, or what did you change, versus somebody who's tried to build their own business or worked at a startup or worked at a smaller company or dealt with any sort of change. So for me, people that are exploring opportunities don't just look for something that's bigger. Even I would just say bigger doesn't necessarily mean better experience.
Interesting. You're the father of four, Stanton. This job's got to be something close to 24/7 when you're managing such a complex process. How do you balance your obligations at home and your obligations at work?
That's tough. I think the first thing I would tell you is, obviously I love my family. I love my job. And if I did not love my job, I would be in a tough place.
Yeah.
And it's easy to love a job when you're doing well in it. I think the times that are tough in a job, when I'm having a tough time, like like anything other, everybody goes through challenges in their careers. If you don't love your job, even when you're having a challenge, that's probably a good gut check. I've always found my time at McKesson to be great, even when it's challenging, and so it's made it palatable to be away or to travel a lot or to work the hours I've worked. But then when I'm home, I try to I'm sure I'm home. I try to be all in.
Yep.
So that's the way I deal with it. I think everybody deals with it differently. We try at McKesson to have a pretty good sense for. I think we're fairly respectful of people's personal times and their personal lives, and we know that their families, healthy family tends to generate and translate into a healthy employee. So.
Thank you for that. The audience was able to submit questions in advance, and a lot of them surrounded the Affordable Care Act. How is healthcare reform shaping your business today?
Well, I know there's actually a physician in the audience I talked to earlier, and I thought she summed it up really well. She's seen more patients than ever. So, and I don't know if that necessarily has to do with the Affordable Care Act. It has probably more to do with demographics. So she's seen a lot more patients. She's getting paid less for every procedure or every service or every visit that she makes, and her costs are going up, whether that's her medical malpractice insurance or her cost even from us. And that's a tough squeeze to be in. And so what she needs to do, and this is the name of the game, is she either needs to get very, very competitive, or she needs to merge with other or consolidate with other practices and gain some scale. And one of the things we absolutely see, and you'll hear McKinsey and a lot of other people talk about, the larger are getting larger. That trend is the one sort of, it's like death taxes and scale consolidation. That's a certainty. So we're seeing consolidation, we're seeing integrations in the marketplace, and those are the factors I think that are actually more powerful than even the Affordable Care Act. I think the Affordable Care Act, there continue to be so many questions out there around how is this actually going to work, what's it going to translate into. And one other factor that I think is even more important than the Affordable Care Act is that more and more employers are shifting more of the cost and more of the risk onto the employees. So for anyone in this room who is employed with a company, you've probably seen your deductible go up or your co-pays go up, or different forms of your employer to basically shift the cost of healthcare, which they can't afford, onto you, onto us as individuals. And that makes our industry a more consumer-oriented industry. Because suddenly now people are starting to shop physicians for convenience. You might go to patient first instead of having to wait a week to see your physician. That creates a competitive pressure on physicians. Now they have to suddenly think about, well, should I be open on a Saturday? Should I stay open 2 hours later? Do I need to staff for that? I mean, it's a tough proposition to be in. So those are the forces that I think trump the Accountable Care Act for the moment, and we'll see kind of as things unfold how that has a bearing on our industry.
For a distribution company, fuel prices obviously matter as well. What are the other, I mean,
Yes.
That's one of the macro trends you're obviously, or your folks are following.
Commodities. I never thought of commodities and fuel costs and oil before I came to McKesson Medical Surgical, but petroleum makes up a large part of the products, the core products, latex, other commodities that go into many of our supplies are things that we watch very carefully. We source a lot of product from Asia, from China. Believe it or not, this typhoon, we're watching, like, what is that going to do to disrupt the supply chain? When we have labor strikes at the ports, these things, believe it or not, can have an impact on our business and on the industry. So yeah, there are different forces that you wouldn't think about when you think about medical surgical supplies, but they're there and they run throughout the supply chain.
Having been in this role now for 2.5 years, I wonder, there are only 12 business units at McKesson. How does someone in your position try to map out your own future, if you don't mind me asking that, Stan?
That's a good question. I wish my CEO were here to answer. I think I would probably give myself the same advice. I have to keep my eyes open to sort of what happens next. And my boss, Paul Julian, who runs all the distribution businesses, his mantra is sort of, hey, keep your head down, focus on the job and the jobs at hand, do really well, deliver results above plan, and good things will happen. And I sort of add to that, I'll just keep my head open as things change, which they always do. We just bought this company, Sleetsio, or we were hoping to buy this company, Sleetsio, which is a large German distributor, sort of a worldwide distributor. It's McKesson's first foray into the global markets. And that's a big acquisition for us. I think it's an $8 billion acquisition. It's by far the biggest thing we've ever done. It's still pending. We've made an offer to buy the company. That's got to get approved by both the existing shareholders and the regulators. But those sort of things happen, and they bring changes, and we'll have to see how that all pans out.
Wonder about companies or leaders that you particularly admire. You're a graduate of an MBA program at Kellogg, so you probably got exposure to great leaders there. But as you have made your way through your career, are there particular firms or particular leaders that stand out as models for you, Stan?
Well, and I'm not saying this because he's not here and nobody's going to tell him this, but I think our CEO, John Hammergren, is world class, and he gets a lot of press for, frankly, his compensation, which I tell you right now, I think it's very well earned. And I think he's one of the best leaders I've ever come across, and I've come across a lot of leaders. And he has an interesting balance of strategy and execution and inspiration. And I admire that about him. And he communicates well with a wide variety of people. And he's really phenomenal. And if you look at what he's done for McKesson over the past 12, 13 years, I think it's undeniable that he's been very successful. And that doesn't just happen. And I mean, I know he's done a lot. I can see probably better than most what the moves he's made, the strategies he's implemented, the people he's put around him. He's really impressive. he's worth, if unfortunately, there's not a lot about him because we run very low profile, but he's worth watching.
Let's talk about the other end of talk about future leaders. So I think at the moment, McKesson Medical Surgical probably has 150 or 200 openings, not all of them in Richmond, but they do have openings. How come so many openings? Why are you struggling to fill that talent pipeline?
So we're bringing these two companies together, PSS World Medical and McKesson Medical Surgical, and we've got to go from 50 distribution centers probably down to around 30 in the next 3 years. So we have a lot of project-oriented work that we have to do. We have to go in and we have to retrain all of our sales reps. We have to retrain 500,000 customers on how to order their products from us. We've got to renegotiate all of our supplier contracts. We have to change out all of our financial systems. We have to rebrand a lot of the things that we do. We're taking the best tools and value propositions from the two different companies and putting them together and remarketing them. So there is a tremendous amount of work for us to execute this integration well and actually realize the potential of this integration. And there's a lot of moving pieces there. And so I would say of that 150, 200 spots, maybe half of that will be filled by internal candidates. Sure. And it allows us to retain the talent we have. But there's positions that will open up because of that, and there are these other half that are out there, and that's part of the reason why I'm all here to you. This is a giant recruiting. What you didn't know, this is actually a job fair. There's a lot of opportunities in McKesson, and it's a great company. So if for those of you who are interested in looking for career changes or new careers, it's a great place to start. It's a high growth company, and we definitely have talent needs.
In our last 6 or 7 minutes together, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what the firm does and what you do to serve others. I mean, besides the business that you run, there's obviously a commitment on the part of the company to serve various communities in which you operate, and I know you're involved in some of those nonprofits as well, Stan.
Yeah, thank you. So actually there's two things that I'm actually excited to talk to you guys about. McKesson does believe being active. We may not be very loud, but we are active in the communities that we work with. And in Richmond, we are partnering with the Feed More program as part of the Meals on Wheels, and we've been doing that for a long time. Our employees are involved in collecting and distributing meals to people who are hungry and poverty-stricken. And we promote the holiday parade, Holiday Angels Parade this Christmas, and that's a partnership we have with Walgreens where people can donate food at Walgreens. We then take that and put them into baskets and deliver them around to needy families during the holidays. And it's a really great program. Feed More is a great organization, and we're very excited about that partnership. Nationally, the other thing that we're very excited about, it really relates to cancer and the treatment and survivorship of cancer. So about 3 years ago, McKesson bought a company called US Oncology. We're the largest provider of cancer services in the country. And that really reoriented our thinking and strategies around how can we help fight cancer and how can we be a part of that battle. And our foundation also lines up behind that strategy. And so for the past 2 years, our foundation has actually created a separate not-for-profit company called Giving Comfort. And what we do is we raise money to buy supplies that go into these kits that are then given to patients who are about ready to start their cancer treatments. And the kits are filled with supplies that former patients and physicians have said these supplies would be great for people who are just starting chemo. You know, there's maybe wool caps or Vaseline, or and we do a lot of kits for kids. And we've built about 160,000 kits now, and we've raised a ton of money. And actually, McKesson Medical Surgical has raised the most money within McKesson, which I'm very proud of us doing. And it's a great endeavor. And we know for a fact that these kits, they're little small tokens. They're basically given away for free to these cancer patients, and they kind of come out of the blue. But they're nicer, something to bring a smile, a little bit of comfort to somebody who's going through a tough time. And that's something we're doing nationally. And I know Molly Bittner is in the crowd today. She and I were working together about a year ago at VCU Cancer Center, and I don't know yet. I got to follow up, see if we connected the Giving Comfort kits with VCU, the Massey Cancer Center. But that's the idea. You basically partner with a hospital. We send them the kits. They simply distribute the kits out, the bags to the patients.
Really neat to hear. Stanton,
nice.
thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate all your time and your insight.
Thank you, Richard.
Absolutely.